She lived in a small apartment on the top floor of an old building, the kind where the pipes groaned at night and the walls whispered secrets of the past. Every morning she woke up to the hum of the city below, a constant reminder that the world was moving fast. And she was just another face in the crowd. She worked long hours at a quiet office, filing papers and answering calls, never really talking about herself, never really showing anyone who she truly was. People saw her as ordinary, someone who blended in easily, someone who would never do anything remarkable. That was exactly what they thought. But inside, she had a fire that no one knew about. She carried it quietly, like a secret jewel hidden in her chest. It was a love for music, for the piano, that had grown since she was a child. She remembered sitting at a small, battered piano in her childhood home, pressing the keys with tiny fingers and feeling the sound resonate deep inside her. Music was where she felt alive, where she could be herself without worrying about what anyone thought. She practiced every night when the world was asleep, when no one could see her. She had learned to lose herself in the rhythm and the melody, in the way the notes could tell a story better than words ever could. Her apartment didn't have much space, but she had a corner where a small keyboard sat, covered in dust and memories. She would come home from work, drop her bag on the floor, and sit down. Her fingers moved over the keys automatically at first, just warming up, finding the notes that had become familiar. Then, she would close her eyes and let the music take over. Sometimes it was soft and gentle, almost like a whisper. Other times it was bold and loud, almost like a roar. Each night was different, but each night she felt the same freedom. Here she was not the quiet office worker, not the unnoticed girl in the crowd. Here she was, someone who mattered. She had always been careful about who knew her secret. At work, she never mentioned her talent. The few people who tried to make conversation about hobbies or past experiences would get polite answers. Nothing more. She had learned to hide her passion because she had been laughed at before. When she was younger, she had played at a school recital, her hands trembling as she pressed the keys. Some kids snickered at her mistakes, others whispered about how she wasn't good enough. Even though her parents encouraged her, the memory of those sneers stayed with her. She didn't want to feel that hurt again, so she kept her music private, a hidden world where she could be free. Despite the long days and the exhaustion, she never gave up on her practice. She had a notebook where she wrote down ideas for melodies, little fragments of songs that came to her during lunch breaks or quiet evenings. Sometimes she would record them on her phone, listening back to the sounds that no one else would hear. Each note she played was a piece of herself, a way of saying something she couldn't say with words. And even though she didn't know if anyone would ever listen, she played anyway, because she needed to. Her friends at work knew her as quiet, reliable, the one who never caused trouble. She smiled politely, nodded during conversations, and left early if she had to. They never saw her at her piano, never heard the melodies that flowed from her fingers like water over stones. They didn't know about the nights she stayed up late, playing until her fingers ached, until her eyes blurred, until she felt like she had emptied herself of all the tension and fear she carried from the day. She had dreams. Of course, but they were quiet dreams, ones she didn't dare speak out loud. Dreams of playing for an audience, of being recognized, of letting the world hear her music. But those dreams felt far away, almost impossible. She didn't have the confidence to imagine them happening. She told herself it was enough to play for herself, that the music was its own reward. And yet somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she could surprise everyone. One evening, she stayed later than usual at the office. The building was nearly empty, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound besides the occasional echo of her footsteps. She walked to her favorite coffee shop on the corner, the one with a small piano tucked in the back, often ignored by the busy customers. She ordered a cup of tea and sat at a table near the instrument. Her eyes kept drifting to the piano, almost as if it were calling her. She thought about the music she had been practicing, the melodies that had been stuck in her mind all week. For a moment she felt a spark of daring, a tiny push from somewhere inside that said, "Why not?" She approached the piano hesitantly, hands shaking slightly. The keys were worn from years of use, but they felt alive under her fingers. She sat down, took a deep breath, and pressed a single note. The sound echoed softly through the coffee shop. A few people looked up, curious, but quickly went back to their phones and conversations. She played another note, then another, feeling the music grow beneath her fingers. The nervousness that had gnawed at her stomach began to melt away. This was familiar. This was home. The melodies she had carried in her mind for so long began to flow out, soft at first and then with more confidence as she played. She noticed the reactions of the few people still in the shop. A man paused mid-sip of his coffee. A woman tilted her head, listening. No one laughed or whispered yet, but she could feel the potential for judgment hovering. Like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. She forced herself to ignore it, letting the music guide her. Each chord was a declaration of who she was, each note a piece of her soul reaching out. She didn't care if anyone believed in her, didn't care if they thought she was good enough. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. The piano became her voice, her shield, and her expression all at once. She played songs that no one else had heard, songs that came from deep within her. Some were gentle and melancholic, others bright and full of hope. She felt the room around her change, the air becoming heavier, charged with the emotion she poured into the keys. She noticed subtle shifts in the few patrons who lingered, but she didn't stop to look. Her eyes were closed, her mind fully immersed in the music. It was as if the piano had taken over her body, moving her hands with a life of its own. Time passed without her realizing it. The music seemed to create its own world, a place separate from the judgments. The routines, the doubts that had always held her back. She felt stronger, bolder, more herself than she had ever felt in a crowded room, at a desk, or even in her apartment alone. And yet, the fear was still there, quietly lurking, reminding her that the world outside the coffee shop might never accept her. But for now, it didn't matter. For now, she had the keys, she had the melody, and she had herself. When she finally finished, she opened her eyes slowly. The shop was silent. A few people clapped softly. Others stared, their expressions a mixture of surprise and admiration. She felt a flush of pride mingled with disbelief. No one had laughed. No one had mocked. For a brief, shining moment, she had shared her secret world. And it had been met with respect, even awe. She stood up, feeling the ache in her fingers and the warmth in her chest. She had always thought her talent was something to hide, something too fragile for the world. But in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it could be seen, could be heard, and could touch someone else's heart. It was a small victory, quiet and private, but it mattered more than she could have imagined. As she left the coffee shop that night, walking through the quiet streets back to her apartment, she felt lighter. The city lights reflected in the puddles from a recent rain. She imagined them dancing along with the music still echoing in her mind. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream openly, to think that perhaps her music could reach beyond her small private world. She didn't know how or when, but she felt a new sense of possibility, a new courage growing in her chest. And so, the ordinary girl that everyone overlooked carried her fire quietly, walking through the night with a heart full of melodies and the promise that one day the world would listen. That night marked the beginning of something she couldn't yet see, a turning point where the secret she had cherished alone could begin to touch others, and where her music could become more than just a private escape. It was the start of a journey that would change not just her, but everyone who ever doubted what she could do the next morning. She woke up feeling the same nervous excitement she had felt the night before. She carried it with her as she walked to work, her steps quieter than usual, her mind replaying the sounds she had created on the piano. For the first time, she felt a small flicker of confidence. It was strange to feel that way, almost foreign, but she clung to it like a fragile thread. The office was the same as always. The hum of computers, the low murmur of voices, the constant clicking of keyboards. She sat at her desk and tried to focus on the pile of papers in front of her, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. She imagined the notes, the way her fingers had moved across the keys, and the silence that had followed her music in the coffee shop. It was like a small, private victory she carried with her through the day. During lunch, she walked past a small community center she had never noticed before. Through the windows, she could see a modest stage with a piano in the corner. A small crowd of people seemed to be gathering, some chatting and laughing, others setting up for what looked like a casual recital. Her heart skipped a beat. Something inside her stirred. She wanted to play. She wanted to share what she had hidden for so long, even if it was just with a handful of strangers. She hesitated outside the doors, taking a deep breath. The idea of being laughed at, of being judged, gnawed at the edge of her courage. She remembered the times when she had been mocked as a child, the whispers, the snickers, and the feeling of being small and invisible. But the memory of the applause from the coffee shop also came to mind. That tiny moment of recognition had shown her that maybe she was capable of more than she thought. Slowly, she stepped inside. The room was bright with sunlight streaming through the tall windows. People were chatting, some arranging chairs, some moving music stands. The piano stood quietly in the corner, waiting. She walked closer, her footsteps tentative. She could feel eyes on her, curious glances that she could not see fully, but she imagined them anyway. Some might laugh. Some might think she didn't belong. Her stomach twisted with nerves, but she pressed forward. She reached the piano and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The first note rang out, soft and hesitant, like a whisper. A few people looked up, their attention caught by the unexpected sound. She played another note, then another, letting the music grow naturally. Her hands began to move with confidence, and the melody became richer, more intricate. The room seemed to shift around her. Conversations faded, laughter stopped, and a stillness settled over the small crowd. Then she felt a sudden wave of awareness. Some of the people standing nearby had begun to whisper, their expressions changing from curiosity to amusement. A few exchanged smirks and chuckles, pointing subtly at her. Her heart sank. She recognized it immediately, the old fear creeping back. They didn't think she belonged. They were ready to mock her the moment she stumbled. For a split second, she froze. Her fingers trembled slightly above the keys. The room felt heavier, the air thick with expectation and doubt. But then she remembered the feeling from the coffee shop the night before. She remembered how the music had been her own, untouchable by anyone else's judgment. Slowly, she let the notes flow again, letting the sound fill the space with honesty and emotion. She ignored the snickers, the whispers, the sharp glances. She played not for them, not for approval, but for herself and for the music that had always been her refuge. The laughter started softly at first. A few sharp giggles that cut through the notes. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, assessing, judging. Her chest tightened. She wanted to stop, to shrink, to disappear. But the music seemed to have a mind of its own. Her hands moved, guided by instinct and passion. Each note became bolder, each chord more commanding. The laughter faltered as the melody grew, twisting and turning in ways that demanded attention. The room became a battleground between doubt and talent, fear and courage. Slowly, the murmurs of amusement faded. People stopped whispering. Their smirks disappeared. All that remained was the music and the sound of her fingers dancing over the keys. Some of the audience tilted their heads, surprised by the skill and emotion pouring from the piano. She noticed a few faces open in wonder, their eyes widening, their mouths slightly agape. It was a moment of transformation. The same people who had been ready to mock her were now caught off guard, unsure how to react. She played with everything she had, letting the music tell the story she could not put into words. Her life, her struggles, her secret nights of practice, her dreams that had always felt out of reach, all of it poured into the piano. Each chord was a declaration of who she was. Each note was a challenge to the assumptions, to the laughter, to the disbelief. She was no longer invisible. She was present, alive, and undeniable. The room grew quieter with each passing minute. Some people leaned forward, captivated by the sound. Others simply stood still, listening in disbelief. She felt the shift, the change in energy, and it fueled her even more. Her confidence surged. She moved faster, her hands gliding over the keys effortlessly, her emotions flowing through the music like a river breaking through a dam. The room seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a moment of awe. As the song reached its crescendo, a hush fell over the room. Even the people who had been laughing moments ago were now completely silent, their expressions a mix of shock and admiration. She could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't falter. She continued, letting the music tell the story she had kept hidden for so long. The melody soared, filling every corner of the room, touching hearts she could not see, reaching minds she had never known. When she finally struck the last note, a profound silence hung in the air. The room seemed to be holding its breath, as if no one could believe what they had just witnessed. Then slowly, one person clapped. Another joined, and soon the applause swelled, filling the space with sound and energy. She sat there for a moment, stunned herself, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. The laughter was gone, replaced by respect and admiration. People came forward, smiling, complimenting her skill and expressing amazement. Some admitted they had doubted her at first, but now they were speechless. Others asked questions about her background, curious about how someone so ordinary-looking could produce such extraordinary music. She answered softly, humbly, sharing small details, but keeping the essence of her journey personal and private. She realized that this moment was about more than proving them wrong. It was about sharing a piece of herself, letting the music speak louder than words ever could. She left the community center that day with her head held high, a small smile playing on her lips. The experience had changed something within her. She had faced judgment, mockery, and doubt, and had emerged stronger, more confident, and more certain of her own worth. The music had been her shield and her weapon, her voice and her story. It had transformed the room, and it had transformed her as she walked through the streets. She felt the city around her differently. Every sound, every movement seemed to resonate with possibility. She imagined herself playing in other places, sharing her music with larger audiences, touching hearts, and inspiring others. The fear and doubt were still there, but they had been diminished by the power of her courage and talent. She knew now that she could face the world, not just with music, but with the strength that came from believing in herself. That evening, she returned home and sat at her keyboard. She played slowly, thoughtfully, letting the experiences of the day guide her fingers. The notes carried the echoes of laughter and silence, mockery and admiration, fear and triumph. She played for herself, but she also played for the people who had listened, who had been transformed by her music, even if only for a moment. The piano was no longer just a private refuge. It was a bridge between her and the world, a way to express the depth of her emotions and the strength of her spirit. She realized that this was only the beginning. There would be more moments of doubt, more people who might underestimate her, but she had discovered a new resilience. Her music could break through assumptions, silence, mockery, and command attention. It could carry her beyond the quiet streets, beyond the small apartment, beyond the ordinary life she had always thought she was destined for. As night fell, she closed her eyes and let her fingers linger on the keys, feeling the vibrations beneath her hands. She thought about the people who had laughed, the people who had listened, and the music that had always been hers. A sense of peace settled over her, combined with a quiet excitement for what was to come. She knew that each note she played had the power to change perceptions, to touch hearts. And to prove that talent and passion could not be hidden forever, she smiled softly to herself, thinking about the journey ahead. The laughter of the past could not define her. The doubts of others could not hold her back. She had discovered something more powerful than fear: the courage to share her gift, to stand in front of the world and to let the music speak for her. And she knew deep in her heart that this was only the start of a story that would grow, unfold, and inspire in ways she had never imagined. The room was still buzzing with whispers and quiet murmurs as she positioned herself back at the piano. The initial laughter had faded, replaced by curiosity and an almost tangible tension. She felt her hands shaking slightly, a mix of nerves and adrenaline. But she took a deep breath and reminded herself why she had come here. This was her music, her voice, her chance to show the world what she had kept hidden for so long. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, listening to the faint sounds of the crowd shifting around her. Some faces were skeptical, others expectant. A few young people were smirking, clearly waiting for a mistake. She felt a small pang of fear, but she refused to let it take hold. Instead, she closed her eyes and imagined herself alone in her apartment, where the music had always felt safe and natural. Slowly, her fingers began to move. The first notes were deliberate, soft, careful. They filled the room with a delicate sound, almost fragile, like a candle flickering in the dark. Some in the audience leaned in, unsure at first, not certain if they wanted to believe what they were hearing. She played another chord, then another, letting the music grow slowly. Each note carried intention and emotion, telling a story without words. The melody began to unfold naturally, each hand complementing the other. Building layers that hinted at the depth of her talent, she felt a shift in the energy of the room. The whispers had faded completely. The skeptical expressions had softened. People were listening, truly listening. She allowed herself a small smile behind closed eyes. This was the moment she had been preparing for, though she had never known it would feel like this. Her fingers danced over the keys with growing confidence, the melody becoming richer and more complex. She added subtle variations, unexpected harmonies that lifted the music and caught the audience off guard. A few individuals tried to maintain their composure, their smirks still lingering, but even they could not resist the pull of the music. The laughter that had been so easy moments ago was gone. Every note seemed to weave a spell over the room, capturing attention and silencing doubt. She felt herself relax into the flow, letting the music guide her rather than thinking about what might go wrong. Her mind was clear, her heart open, her soul fully immersed in the sound. The piano seemed to respond to her emotions, the keys vibrating with a resonance that filled the space. She played faster now, her hands moving with precision and fluidity. The melody twisted and turned, rising and falling like waves in a storm. She could sense the crowd leaning forward, their eyes wide, their expressions caught between awe and disbelief. This was no longer a simple performance. It was a declaration of her presence, challenge to the assumptions that had always tried to keep her small. Suddenly, she felt a wave of fear, a brief, sharp doubt. What if she made a mistake? What if they laughed again? Her hands faltered for a moment, but the music refused to stop. It surged through her, stronger than her fear. She let the melody take control, allowing herself to be carried by the rhythm and the notes she had practiced countless times in private. Each chord became a statement. She belonged here. Her talent could not be ignored. The audience was silent now, captivated. Some were leaning closer, unsure if what they were hearing was real. Others had their eyes closed, letting the music wash over them, feeling it in a way that went beyond sound. Even the people who had been ready to mock her were drawn in, unable to resist the honesty and skill in every note. She felt a sense of triumph growing inside her, a quiet, steady power that came from finally being seen and heard as the music progressed. She began to experiment, introducing unexpected shifts in rhythm and dynamics. The notes danced and intertwined, creating a texture that was both intricate and emotionally powerful. She felt the energy of the room responding to her, each subtle movement of the audience feeding her confidence and daring. She was no longer just playing a piano. She was telling a story, revealing her life, her struggles, her secret hours of practice, her hopes and dreams. The melody became more intense, Chan moving independently yet in perfect harmony. She pushed the limits of her skill, her fingers moving faster and more confidently than ever before. The music was no longer just sound. It was a force, a presence that filled every corner of the room and reached into the hearts of everyone who listened. The people who had laughed were now silent, their faces showing astonishment. Their eyes wide with admiration, she noticed subtle reactions, a hand covering a mouth in surprise, a head tilting as if to catch every nuance, a smile of genuine appreciation slowly spreading across a previously skeptical face. The power of the music was undeniable. She felt her heart swell with pride and emotion. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment she had longed for in her quiet nights of practice. And she was living it fully, unapologetically, with courage and grace. The music began to reach its climax. Her hands moved with a speed and precision that left no room for error. Each note was deliberate, its chord carefully placed to build tension and release it in waves of sound that resonated deeply with the audience. She felt the emotional connection between her and the listeners, a bridge formed entirely by the piano. It was an unspoken dialogue, a communication that transcended words. Reaching directly to the heart, the room was completely silent except for the piano. Even the sounds of movement, the shuffling of feet, the faint rustling of clothes, had disappeared. Everyone was holding their breath, caught in the spell of her music. She felt the weight of their attention, but it did not scare her. Instead, it inspired her. She played with even more expression, letting her emotions flow freely through the keys. The music became more than a performance. It became a revelation, a testament to her resilience and hidden talent. Finally, she reached the final section of her piece. The notes slowed, becoming deliberate and full of meaning. Each chord hung in the air, heavy with emotion. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a sense that she had given everything she had to the music and to the moment. She pressed the last key and let it resonate, allowing the sound to linger and fill the space one final time. Then, she lifted her hands and sat in silence, feeling the vibrations fade, but knowing the impact had been made. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was profound, a collective recognition of what had just happened. The room seemed to be holding its breath, suspended between disbelief and admiration. Then, slowly, a soft clap echoed through the space. Another followed. Soon, the applause grew, swelling into a wave of sound that filled the room and carried her triumph into every corner. She smiled, a mixture of relief and pride, knowing that she had transformed the initial laughter into awe, skepticism into respect. People came forward, their expressions open and amazed. They complimented her skill, asked about her training, expressed their astonishment at the depth of emotion in her performance. She answered quietly, humbly, sharing small insights but keeping the essence of her personal journey private. It was enough that they had listened, that they had been moved, that they had seen the power of her talent for the first time. She had broken through the walls of judgment and disbelief, and the world had paused to notice. As she left the piano, the energy of the room lingered in her chest. She felt stronger, braver, more certain of her own worth than ever before. The experience had changed something fundamental in her. She realized that she could no longer allow fear or doubt to hold her back. She had faced judgment and mockery and had emerged victorious, not through words or argument, but through the undeniable truth of her music. Walking through the quiet streets afterward, she reflected on the power of that moment. She had discovered that talent, when expressed with honesty and courage, could command attention, silence, criticism, and transform perceptions. She thought about the people who had laughed and the people who had listened in awe. Each reaction was a lesson, a reminder that the world often underestimates what it does not immediately understand at home. She returned to her own piano and played again, slowly, thoughtfully, letting the emotions of the day guide her hands. The notes carried the echoes of the audience, the laughter and the silence, the doubt and the admiration. She played not for them but for herself, solidifying the connection between her passion and her growing confidence. Every chord was a declaration that she could no longer be hidden, that her music had a place in the world. That night, she slept with a sense of accomplishment and possibility she had never known before. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more people who might underestimate her or judge her abilities. But she also knew that she had the courage and skill to rise above it, to let the music speak louder than doubt or fear. She had discovered her own power, and she carried it with her like a beacon, illuminating the path forward, one note at a time. The room was quiet, but not in a simple, empty way. It was alive with attention, anticipation, and emotion. Every person present felt it, whether they wanted to or not. The initial skepticism had melted away, leaving space for something stronger, something more profound: respect. She sat at the piano, fingers hovering just above the keys, taking in the subtle shift in energy. She could sense it in the way people were holding their breath, the way eyes were focused. The way the air itself seemed to be waiting. Her hands touched the keys, and the first notes rang out, bold yet soft, gentle yet commanding. Each chord carried her experience, her struggles, her triumphs, the countless nights of private practice, and the pain of being underestimated. The sound was richer now, not because she had changed, but because the space had changed. The audience had transformed from skeptics into witnesses. Ready to receive what she had to give, the music began to weave a story. Intricate and emotional, carrying layers of feeling that words could never capture. It started with a tender sadness, a reflection of the loneliness she had carried, the moments of quiet self-doubt. The melody meandered like a river, sometimes still and calm, sometimes rippling with unspoken tension. The listeners felt it too. A few faces tightened with recognition, perhaps memories stirred by the music. The emotion unmistakable, her fingers moved across the keys with precision, yet with a delicate freedom that made the notes feel alive. The audience could hear it. This was not a performance done to impress. It was a performance done to reveal, to connect, to communicate something essential about her life. The energy of the room was palpable. Some were leaning in, trying to catch every nuance, every subtle shift. In tempo, every change in the chords. Others had closed their eyes, surrendering to the music. Allowing themselves to feel in a way they hadn't anticipated, she began to accelerate the pace. The music flowing faster, more confident, and more daring. Each hand moved independently, creating textures that layered over one another, surprising and captivating. The melody danced between highs and lows, telling a story that was at once personal and universal. She could feel the power of her own music now, the way it could touch, move, and captivate. She was no longer playing just for herself. She was playing for the room, for the people who had once doubted her, for the small seed of courage that had led her here. A few individuals shifted uncomfortably, perhaps realizing too late that they had misjudged her. Their expressions softened, amazement replacing incredulity. Some stared with mouths slightly open, absorbing the depth of what they were hearing. Others nodded slowly, as if acknowledging an unspoken truth, that talent cannot be hidden indefinitely, and that beauty often appears where it is least expected. The music changed again. This time to a passage filled with hope and resilience. She had been underestimated, but here she was, proving more than anyone could have imagined. The melody lifted, the notes rising in confidence and clarity. She could feel the audience leaning forward, caught in the gravity of the moment. Even the most critical listeners were being drawn in, pulled along by the honesty and emotion that radiated from every chord. She allowed herself to notice the subtle reactions around her. A hand gripped the edge of a chair, knuckles white with astonishment. A woman's eyes glistened, moisture threatening to spill. A young man's jaw relaxed, tension replaced by admiration. The power of music, the raw expression of a human heart, had broken down walls in the room. Laughter and judgment had no place here. All that remained was the truth of her gift and the way it had touched others. Her music began to take on an almost physical presence, filling the space completely. It was no longer just sound. It was a force that connected every person in the room. She could feel their attention like a tangible weight pressing against her, challenging her, inspiring her. She pushed herself further, her fingers moving faster, yet with clarity and control. The melody became a dialogue, a conversation with each listener, a way of saying without words that she mattered, that her talent was real, that she deserved to be seen. The emotional climax approached. She introduced unexpected chords, subtle shifts that created tension, suspense, and release. Each note resonated with intention. The room seemed to pulse with the energy she generated. Her music was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone in the space. They were participants, not merely observers. She had transformed their doubt into curiosity, their amusement into admiration, their silence into a shared experience of beauty and power. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, though her heart pounded with excitement and emotion. She had never felt such a connection between herself and a group of strangers. It was electrifying, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. The melody swelled, notes rising and falling, weaving a tapestry of sound that carried joy, sorrow, and everything in between. Her hands flew over the keys with speed and grace, but each movement was purposeful, deliberate, and full of feeling. Time seemed to suspend. She felt herself completely immersed in the moment, in the music, in the energy of the room. The audience was fully present, their attention unwavering, their emotions stirred. She had captured them entirely, transforming initial judgment and ridicule into an appreciation for her skill and passion. The laughter had vanished. There was no room for it here. Only silence, anticipation, and awe remained as the final notes approached. She slowed, savoring each chord, allowing them to resonate fully in the space. The music softened, gentle and tender, carrying the weight of the journey she had taken to arrive at this point. Every struggle, every private moment of practice, every moment of doubt was embodied in those last notes. The audience could feel it. They were moved, touched, and changed by the honesty and depth of her expression. Then came the silence. A profound collective pause where the room seemed to be holding its breath. The notes hung in the air, vibrating softly, leaving an imprint on the hearts of those present. It was a moment of reflection, recognition, and awe. She lifted her hands from the keys, feeling the resonance fade, yet knowing that its impact remained. The room was no longer the same as when she had begun. Something fundamental had shifted, a recognition that talent and courage could transform perception in an instant. Slowly, the applause began. One person clapped, then another. Then the sound grew, swelling into a wave of admiration that filled the space. People cheered, some standing, some wiping tears from their eyes, all expressing a genuine appreciation for what they had witnessed. She remained seated for a moment, absorbing the response, letting it wash over her. Relief, pride, and joy mingled in her chest. The mockery, the judgment, the laughter, all of it had been replaced by respect and awe. People approached her afterward, their faces open, their expressions filled with curiosity and admiration. They asked about her training, her inspirations, and how she had developed such skill and depth of expression. She answered softly, humbly, careful to share only what she felt comfortable with. The essential truth remained. This music was her story, her voice, her declaration. The fact that others had been touched by it was a validation she had long yearned for. But it was also a reminder of the power of staying true to oneself. As she left the room that evening, the street seemed brighter, alive with possibility. The city lights reflected her own excitement, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. She had faced skepticism and laughter and had transformed it into awe. She had touched hearts and minds with nothing but her music and her courage. The experience had given her a taste of what she was capable of. She knew that it was only the beginning. Back in her apartment, she returned to her piano and played once more. Her fingers moved gently over the keys, reliving the emotions and the energy of the evening. She felt a deep connection to her own music, a reaffirmation of why she had spent so many nights practicing in secret. It was no longer just an escape. It was a bridge to the world, a way to communicate her story and touch the lives of others. She reflected on the people who had once doubted her, who had been ready to laugh and mock. She realized that their judgment no longer had power over her. The music, her courage, and her perseverance had spoken louder than any sneer, any whisper, any ridicule. She had discovered that true talent could not be hidden indefinitely, and that authenticity and dedication could command attention and respect. That night, as she finally allowed herself to rest, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The performance had been more than a demonstration of skill. It had been a declaration of self-worth, a transformation of perception, and a reminder of the power of belief in oneself. She knew that challenges and doubts would come again, but she had proven to herself that she could rise above them, that she could command respect and admiration through honesty, skill, and courage. The journey was far from over, but she felt ready. She had faced the laughter, overcome the mockery, and stunned the room with her music. She had discovered that her voice could not only be heard, but felt, and that the hidden strength she carried within could transform the way others saw her. The music had become her power, her story, and her promise for the future, a promise she intended to honor with every note she played. The applause slowly began to fade, leaving a gentle hum of excitement and admiration in the room. She remained seated at the piano for a moment, letting the last vibrations of the notes linger in the air. Her chest felt light, her heart full, and her mind buzzing with the energy of the performance. For the first time, she understood what it truly meant to share herself with the world. To offer a part of her soul and see it embraced, people began to approach her, one by one, their faces open and sincere. They wanted to talk, to know more, to understand the person behind the music. Some asked about her background, curious about where she had learned to play with such skill. Others admitted they had doubted her, but now they were in awe. She answered quietly, humbly, carefully sharing small pieces of her journey. It was a strange feeling, being the center of attention for something that had always been so private. But she felt a quiet strength growing inside her. A woman in the crowd said, "I can't believe I laughed at you earlier." That was incredible. The words struck her, not as insult or shame, but as acknowledgement. She had been seen for who she truly was, not for the assumptions others had made. The feeling was overwhelming. It was a mixture of relief, pride, and deep gratitude. She realized that this was the reward she had been seeking all along. Not fame or praise, but recognition of her dedication, her heart, and her honesty. She stood up, her legs slightly shaky, and allowed herself to take in the full scope of the moment. The room that had been filled with doubt and quiet amusement was now alive with respect and admiration. People were smiling, nodding, some clapping again. There was a warmth that filled the space, a connection she had never felt before. The music had done more than entertain. It had transformed the energy of the room, changed perceptions.